Indie games. Along with retro games, pretty much the bread and butter of both my channel and most of the YouTube videos I watch. I feel like there's always intrinsic value in these kinds of videos, which helps. They give a little boost to a game that might otherwise get overlooked. And, well, only 2 months into 2025, we already have a couple of indie gems, one of which I have been waiting for since last year, while the other was a nice, refreshing short break from the massive games that have been taking up a lot of my time. Normally I like a slightly longer intro than this, but that's kinda all this video is. Here, look at 2 neat indie games. So, here, look at 2 neat indie games. Let's not bury the lead. I've been wanting to make this video since I played the demo for this game last summer, so let's jump right into the game I'm hyping up. Stories from Seoul: The Gun Dog. An adventure game clearly drawing from retro Japanese adventure games and anime, especially games from the PC 98. And just to get to this quick, because this is a story-focused game, I am not going to use any footage outside of the first couple hours. Nothing you wouldn't have already seen if you played the demo. But yes, this is a game that is clearly designed as a throwback to retro Japanese adventure games for the PC 98. A Japanese computer best known in the West for various games with absolutely gorgeous pixel art. And this game definitely channels that with its gorgeous retro anime style. And I do specify an adventure game here. Some people might intuitively class it as a visual novel, mostly due to the anime style and portraits. But aside from the fact that my understanding is there's much less of a distinction between the two genres in Japan anyway, the game has mechanics you'd expect from an adventure game, with the focus being on moving around, interacting with things, and solving puzzles. But the result is effectively a playable 80s sci-fi OVA. The story starts in a place that should feel pretty familiar to the Gundam fans in the audience, since it riffs on many iconic Gundam settings. It's the end of a war between the central government on Earth and the rebelling forces from Mars and Jupiter. The rebels are winning, having made it to the Earth sphere to launch a major battle in lunar orbit. And you're a mech pilot in the final battle, fighting for the Jovian forces. However, as your squad launches, you get stuck. You spend the whole battle trapped in an inactive mech, stuck to the outside of a ship's hull, while your squad is slaughtered. The resulting trauma leads you to retire from being a pilot and instead work as ship security. 4 years later, you're at the start of a new tour aboard a small ship with less than a dozen crew members, set to investigate what seems like a minor incident. But it doesn't take long to notice that a lot of the crew is a little odd. The XO is apparently talented, but a little ditzy. Also, she's your girlfriend and pulled some strings to get you on the ship in the first place. The head mechanic is capable, but a bit too obsessive at times. Her subordinate is a bit flaky owing to his juggling his current duties with research work, and is constantly cripplingly anxious. The gunnery officer spends a lot of his time, even on duty, listening to music. One of the 2 frame pilots is your old squad mate, the only survivor from your squad, who blames you for everyone else's deaths. The bridge officer is very capable, but she's extremely abrasive and also very quickly proves to be self-centered as well. And then of course there's you, the traumatized pilot turned security officer, who mostly ended up here because of the aforementioned girlfriend pulling some strings. And then of course a dysfunctional crew like this is naturally a powder keg for when things go wrong. Look, does that even count as a spoiler? It's an adventure game with a military sci-fi setting. Something was bound to happen eventually. It wasn't going to be all routine patrols. And when something does happen, it's on you to try and keep the crew alive and get everyone out of this as you go from one bad situation to the next. And the game does a good job of keeping you guessing too. There's some things that are appropriately foreshadowed, but the game is constantly pulling you into new scenarios, so you can't just predict the whole thing from the start. And yet at the same time, everything ultimately ties together because of how the problems compound. You're rarely lucky enough to have one problem end before the next one starts. But the characters are great though. Even the protagonists, despite the fact that their name and gender are entirely up to you and they're seemingly meant purely as an avatar, they do have a good amount of personality, always appearing professional and capable. And the crew are all pretty well written, mostly likable, except for the ones who are clearly written to be assholes that you're supposed to dislike. And the world is also rich, lots of little details. The fact that you can look at a bunch of things to get the protagonist's thoughts on them also helps to fill in a lot of these little details. Each room will generally have 4 to 6 different things you can look at and interact with, and if they're not important to advancing, they'll usually contain some interesting bit of text. And if that's not enough, there's even a small codex with some background info. It doesn't overdo the lore, but there's enough to properly give you the impression of a larger world, which I think is probably one of the most important things that world building can do in a game, especially a game like this where everything's constrained almost entirely to a single ship. It's important to be able to believe that there is a wider solar system outside the hull of your ship. But overall, while it's hard to talk about while I am trying so hard to avoid any spoilers, the story is a good character drama that avoids being too predictable and manages to keep up a good sense of narrative tension. I'm not sure it has much in the way of deeper themes, just interesting character writing. It left me wanting more, so it does its job well. As for the interactive elements of things, puzzles are usually relatively simple, mostly about your ability to observe or remember details, and checking everything thoroughly. Honestly, I feel like the game sometimes holds your hand a little too much with these, rather than just letting you look around for the solutions. But there's still fun to be had in poking around. And since the story is solid in the main draw, I'd much rather the puzzles be a little easy and feel competent than bash my head against some old school moon logic. A lot of the time, the focus is a bit more on exploring and searching each area and interacting with the cast. Much of the time the writing carries it, whether it's the dialogue or the protagonist talking to themselves about things they observe in the environment. But everything is also very nicely streamlined to avoid frustration. For instance, there's no pixel hunting here because anything you can interact with is clearly highlighted if you mouse over it, and can be selected with the arrow keys just cycling through the options. There's quick travel to get around your ship easily, very convenient for when some parts do require you to do a bit of back and forth, or when you're just trying to find the right solution and don't know where to look. And there's even very generous autosaves at each choice. Actually, they're so frequent that you can run through the 6 slots a little too quickly, but it's nice if an action doesn't quite play out the way you thought it would. The game's also pretty good about making sure you don't screw yourself by crossing a point of no return, though this does sometimes make you do a bit of second guessing. At the same time, the game is usually good about telling you when you're clear to go ahead. In the end, this is a story-focused game, so while the gameplay isn't too special, it's an enjoyable enough complement and serves to engage you with the scenarios you're given. As I wrap this up, I will mention the game isn't too long. I beat it in under 8 hours. It's a good ride though, and you can always go exploring to see the different routes and how things play out. And maybe this is a good combination. I'm not normally one to replay games to search out every possible outcome, but this isn't too daunting, so I could totally see myself giving it another go-around in the coming weeks if I have a bit of free time. Because it's a great little game and has left me desperate for more. There's clearly room for more in this setting, whether a direct sequel or something only tangentially related. Heck, with the title and subtitle format, this game even sounds like there should be more in the Stories from Seoul saga. The only thing that makes it hard to recommend is that both adventure games and this sort of retro anime sci-fi are somewhat niche genres, and I'm not sure this game quite rises to the level that it'll hook someone not immediately enamored with it from those elements. But if you do like those things, well, the game's execution is solid and it will scratch that itch for you. After all, you know a game is doing something right if my biggest complaint is wanting more. And I'd love to see the creators have the money to do more with this setting if they want to. And most importantly, I'd just hate this game to go under the radar of someone who might love it. Our second indie game is one I played and that released in January. You see, I needed a little break. I've been playing a long Japanese RPG for April, the next long action RPG for my Phantasy Star retrospectives, and when I'm not playing anything for a video, I'm playing Xenoblade 2, a very long Japanese RPG. So I decided to dip into my Steam wallet and grab something new, cheap, indie, and quick. And Blade Chimera was the perfect bit of medicine I needed. So about the game. Blade Chimera has you playing as Shin, a character whose design I love, by the way. It's edgy in the best way. But he's an agent for a religiously inclined organization dedicated to hunting demons, and which also seems to be filling in for the government. And this organization is, well, it's pretty painfully obvious that they're going to turn out to be the baddies. Imagine you Natco from Deus Ex mixed with religious zealotry and just generally way more obviously evil, and Shin is one of their top agents. But on a mission that has him fighting a particularly powerful demon, he ends up bound to a demon himself, a demon named Lux, who takes the form of a sword. And from here, Shin, being not a horrible person, gradually drives him to question more and more as he drifts away from the ideals of the organization. And as we get into gameplay, Lux is clearly one of the defining parts of this game. She basically is the answer to the question, what if we made an entire game around the sword familiar from Castlevania Symphony of the Night? You can launch Lux to attack enemies, use her to create a shield, interact with the environment, climb walls, and even calling her back can be used to launch a shockwave attack. Plus, she provides your magic special attacks and your double jump. But Lux can only do one thing at a time, lending an element of management to using her, as well as the added tech of using both her abilities and Shin's at the same time to optimize your damage output. It's a little overwhelming at first, but once you get the hang of it, using Lux is really satisfying. It's one of those game systems designed to mirror a unique concept with unique systems. Sure, they could have done something more conventional, but that would have reduced Lux to effectively being a cool visual element. And as games are a fundamentally interactive medium, I generally prefer something unconventional but unique that lends itself to the experience. And that brings us to the combat, which is probably the big draw here. It's satisfying and quick once you get the hang of it, and the bosses tend to have engaging patterns. There's a wide variety of moves at your disposal to make combat feel dynamic and reactive once you get used to what you have at your disposal. You're given a fair bit of room to choose how you fight, too, between various types of melee weapons and firearms, Lux's expansive moveset, and special attacks. Plus, there's a bit of meter management, which I always find to be nice, in that using your weapon attacks restores your MP, while using Lux's attacks to consume MP but restore your hit points. It adds a nice little rhythm, I guess. It's not quite as technical as something like Mega Man Zero, still my high watermark for side-scrolling action platformers, but it's good, better than most, and the gameplay gives you enough options to feel satisfying and expressive. And that leads to the most important thing, which is that quick and skillful play feels good. That said, it is almost unfortunate how little time you spend going back to past areas, because while I know that's kind of a hot take, I do think there's value to it in this particular type of fast-paced action platformer, where mastery and familiarity can lead to speed and some very impressive techniques. But that leads me to the last point, which is how the game streamlines Metroidvania. Mainly in that very early on, you can unlock fast travel from the skill tree, and unlike many games that would limit to certain points, such as save points, here you can fast travel to any square on the map. Or nearly any square. There are a very small number of exceptions. It makes this a very appealing Metroidvania for those who find the backtracking in the genre to be tiresome, and it makes the side quests fly by as you're able to quickly teleport around to search for your objectives. Though, while we're on the topic, I do want to split hairs a little and say I do hesitate to commit to calling it a Metroidvania. Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, it has the map that looks like this, and it does have the general flow of one, but it lacks the opening new areas through new abilities aspect. You can get some secrets by getting new skill tree unlocks, but you generally don't get new abilities from story progression, and instead typically the map is just opened up by getting key cards to unlock new doors. Still, exploring is a good part of the game, and it's engaging enough with plenty of stuff to find and reason to revisit areas. There's enough side quests and hidden items to make you go back through areas, but the ease of fast travel makes it not too time consuming or boring. In fact, the game is pretty short, like only around 10 hours short, and that's trying to do every side quest and collect every one of the main collectibles. And I can definitely see this making or breaking the game for a lot of people. Personally, because I just wanted a quick break from all the long RPGs, just burning through something that shines short and bright is just what the doctor ordered for me. In fact, the short runtime gives the plot a nice action movie sort of pace too, which works well with the fact that this isn't really a story where the hero solves everything and saves the world. In the end, it's really just the story of three main characters, and the ending to their tale only starts the world changing. It's sometimes easy to forget how nice a short and sweet game like this can be, you know, something you can beat in a weekend. That's even true among indie games. I think it's sometimes easy to forget these days when the success of the open world genre has pushed AAA releases to be longer and longer, or all the live service games meant to be played forever. Or heck, it's even easy to forget the joy of short games when you just regularly have tastes like mine. Just look at all the RPGs I play and am playing. This is not a genre that's ever tended to be short. Look, I'm all about deeply appreciating and really spending time with games, but sometimes it's good to just play something like this to remind you of the simpler joys of gaming. So maybe that's all this game needed to be. It's a short, really good Metroidvania that won't cost you much. In fact, it's available in a bundle with Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, so you can either get two great Metroidvanias or get it for a little less if you already own Bloodstained. So I can recommend this game because sometimes just being good is good enough. And before we close out, there's a few other games I want to at least mention. First, Ender Magnolias. It's in early access, so I'm not playing it yet, but I am looking forward to it. It's the sequel to Ender Lily's Quietus of the Nights, which is one of my favorite indie Metroidvanias. And I also have been having a bit of fun with a game called Fly Night. I don't know, it's neat, kind of Soulsy, and it's cheap. I haven't fully clicked with it yet, but I do want to play it more, and it even has co-op. But also, it's a game that I found out about from another YouTube video, and I don't usually do videos on games I found out about from other YouTube creators unless I have something of my own to add. But doing this has really put me in the mood for more indie games. I mean, it's not a 2025 game, so it's not getting featured in this, but I did play through Pseudo Regalia very recently, just because I wanted something indie. It's just nice to take a break from the big games, but don't worry, I'm still going to keep grinding on Phantasy Star Zero to get that next Phantasy Star video ready. And speaking of big games, next month we will not be covering Monster Hunter Wilds like I originally intended. Not that I'm not interested, I enjoyed sticking my toe into the demo, but my computer was screaming in agony, and so the time has come that I do need to upgrade even if I'm not really happy about it. Well, the impending end of Windows 10 meant this was probably necessary anyway. I do plan to cover Monster Hunter Wilds later in the year though, so assuming I like it, there will probably still be a video. Besides, while there is probably an advantage in like algorithm stuff, I'd rather let my thoughts on the game sit for a bit before making a video on it. My opinions on World and Rise both changed a lot over time, and in Rise's case especially, my opinion of the base game with the title updates is vastly higher than my opinion of the base game without them. So I would just rather do one video than have to correct my opinion 6 months later. But anyway, back on topic. Have you played any of these indie games? Have I convinced you to play any of them? Are there any other great indie games that have already dropped in 2025 that I overlooked? Let me know in the comments below, and for now, this is Mikhail, signing off.